Jason had been out for a business meeting and returned home earlier than usual. The house was eerily quiet when he walked in, a stark contrast to the usual chaos of the evening routine. As he made his way upstairs, he heard muffled cries coming from Penelope's room. His heart pounded in his chest as he rushed to the door. What he saw when he opened it made his blood run cold. Dorothy was standing over Penelope, her face twisted in anger. The first time Jason met Dorothy, it felt like fate was finally smiling on him. A widower with a 6-year-old daughter, he had thought love was something he would never feel again. But Dorothy changed that. She was everything he didn't know he needed. A vibrant, intelligent, and loving woman who brought light into his life, which had been dimmed by grief and loneliness. Dorothy's kindness towards his daughter Penelope was what sealed the deal for him. From their first meeting, she seemed to genuinely care about the little girl. She would braid Penelope's hair, help her with her homework, and even taught her how to cook Chinese rice, a task Penelope had once deemed impossible. Their laughter would fill the house, and Jason often found himself smiling as he watched them together. It was in those moments he thought he had found the perfect woman to build a new life with.
Penelope, what do you think of Auntie Dorothy?
Jason had asked one night as he tucked his daughter into bed.
She's nice, Daddy. I like her.
Penelope had replied, her eyes drooping with sleep.
She makes the best pancakes.
That simple, innocent endorsement was all Jason needed. He proposed to Dorothy a month later, on a brisk evening in November, under the shimmering Christmas lights in London's Covent Garden. Dorothy had cried tears of joy, and Penelope had danced around them, giggling with excitement. It was a new beginning, a chance at happiness once more. The wedding was a small, intimate affair, attended by close friends and family. Penelope was the flower girl scattering rose petals down the aisle with the most radiant smile Jason had ever seen on her face. When Dorothy walked down the aisle, her eyes fixed on him, Jason's heart swelled with love and hope. He could see the future so clearly in that moment, a life of shared dreams and fulfilled promises, with Penelope at the center of it all. But life has a way of unraveling even the most perfect plans. The first few months of their marriage were everything Jason had hoped for. They settled into their cozy home in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of London. Dorothy took up the role of stepmother with grace, and Penelope seemed to be thriving under her care. There were family outings to the park, movie nights, and endless rounds of Uno, where Dorothy would always let Penelope win. Jason often found himself thinking that he had struck gold, but as time went on, subtle changes began to emerge. Cracks in the facade that only Penelope could see. At first they were small things, like Dorothy suddenly deciding that Penelope couldn't watch TV until she had finished all her homework, even though Jason had always been lenient about it. Then, Dorothy started insisting that Penelope should spend more time reading, which meant no more playdates with her friends.
But I finished my book, Auntie Dorothy.
Penelope would protest.
Then start another one.
Dorothy would reply with a sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes.
You need to improve your vocabulary.
Penelope, ever the obedient child, would comply without complaint, but Jason noticed the way her shoulders would slump as she walked away. He chalked it up to Dorothy being a bit stricter than he was, and he reasoned that maybe it wasn't such a bad thing. After all, Dorothy had a point. Penelope could stand to read more. But it didn't stop there. Dorothy started to enforce more rules. No more sugary cereals, limited internet access, and a strict bedtime that was earlier than what Penelope was used to. Jason noticed the shift in the household dynamic, but he was too enamored with Dorothy to question it. Whenever Penelope tried to talk to him about it, he would gently remind her that Dorothy was only trying to help her become more disciplined.
You know Auntie Dorothy loves you, right? She's just looking out for you,
He would say, patting her on the head. Penelope would nod, but the light in her eyes was dimming. The day Dorothy turned off the internet without warning was the first time Penelope raised her voice.
But I need it for my school project.
Penelope exclaimed, her small fists clenched at her sides.
Your father and I have decided that the internet bills are too high. You can do your project at the library.
Dorothy responded coolly, not even bothering to look up from her book.
But Daddy,
Enough, Penelope.
Dorothy snapped, her tone sharp.
Do as you're told.
Penelope ran to her room, tears streaming down her face, and Jason found her there later, curled up on her bed, sobbing quietly.
Daddy, why is Auntie Dorothy so mean to me now?
She whispered when he asked what was wrong. Jason was taken aback.
You mean? Penelope, she's just being firm. You have to understand that she wants what's best for you.
But she wasn't like this before.
People change, Penelope. She's adjusting to being your stepmom. Give her some time, okay?
Penelope nodded, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He told himself it was just the stress of blending their new family together. Dorothy loved Penelope. He was sure of it. There was no way she could be mistreating her. It must be Penelope's imagination, her way of coping with the changes in their lives. But the truth was far darker than Jason dared to imagine. Over the next few months, the situation at home continued to deteriorate. Dorothy's behavior became more erratic, more controlling. She started grounding Penelope for the smallest infractions, like leaving a light on in her room or forgetting to put her shoes away. The punishments were harsh and disproportionate, but Dorothy always had an excuse ready.
I'm just trying to teach her responsibility, Jason.
Dorothy would say whenever Jason questioned her.
She's growing up and she needs to learn how to be more disciplined.
Jason, not wanting to rock the boat, would reluctantly agree, though the doubt in his mind was growing stronger. One evening, when Jason was working late, Penelope came to him with a bruised arm. She had been crying, her eyes puffy and red.
Auntie Dorothy pushed me. Daddy,
She sobbed. Jason's heart nearly stopped.
What? Why would she do that?
I didn't clean my room like she asked, but I was just finishing my homework. She got mad and pushed me.
Jason knelt in front of his daughter, his hands trembling as he examined the bruise.
Are you sure, Penelope? Maybe it was an accident?
Penelope shook her head fiercely.
No, Daddy. She pushed me on purpose. She's been mean to me for a long time. You just don't see it.
The doubt that had been gnawing at Jason finally broke through. He confronted Dorothy that night, his voice shaking with anger.
Dorothy, what is this? Why did you push Penelope?
Dorothy looked genuinely surprised at the accusation.
Push her? Jason, what are you talking about? I would never hurt Penelope. She must have misunderstood something. You know how kids are.
But she's got a bruise, Dorothy. And she said you've been treating her bad.
Dorothy's expression softened, and she reached out to touch his arm.
Jason, you know I love Penelope. Maybe I've been a bit too strict, but it's only because I want her to grow up right. I would never intentionally hurt her. Please believe me.
Jason wanted to believe her, needed to believe her. The alternative was too painful to consider. So, he convinced himself that Penelope was just being overly sensitive, that she was still adjusting to having a new mother figure in her life. He didn't know how wrong he was. As the months passed, Penelope became more withdrawn. She no longer smiled as often, and the laughter that once filled their home was gone. She spent most of her time in her room, avoiding Dorothy as much as possible. Jason noticed the change, but every time he tried to talk to Penelope, she would just shrug and say she was fine. Then, one fateful evening, everything came crashing down. Jason had been out for a business meeting and returned home earlier than usual. The house was eerily quiet when he walked in, a stark contrast to the usual chaos of the evening routine. As he made his way upstairs, he heard muffled cries coming from Penelope's room. His heart pounded in his chest as he rushed to the door. What he saw when he opened it made his blood run cold. Dorothy was standing over Penelope, her face twisted in anger. She had just slapped Penelope across the face, and the little girl was crumpled on the floor, sobbing.
Bradley, what the hell are you doing?
Jason roared, his voice filled with fury, as he rushed forward to pull Dorothy away from his daughter. Dorothy stepped back, her expression quickly shifting from rage to a mask of innocence.
Jason, this isn't what it looks like.
Get out!
Jason shouted. Jason's voice echoed through the house, each word sharp and filled with a pain that had been building for months. He wrapped his arms around Penelope, who was trembling in his embrace, her sobs breaking his heart.
Jason, please.
Dorothy pleaded, stepping toward him.
I can explain.
Explain. Explain what, Dorothy? That you've been abusing my daughter? That you've been lying to me all this time?
Dorothy's face paled as she realized the gravity of the situation.
Jason, you know I love her. I didn't mean to.
Don't you dare!
Jason cut her off. standing up and putting himself between Dorothy and Penelope.
Don't you dare say you love her. If this is your idea of love, I want no part of it.
Dorothy opened her mouth to speak, but the words died on her lips. She had been so careful, so meticulous in hiding her true nature. She never thought it would come to this. But now, with Jason's eyes blazing with betrayal, she knew there was no coming back from this. Jason turned away from her, his focus on the most important thing in his life, his daughter. He knelt down and gently wiped the tears from Penelope's cheeks.
Penelope, are you okay?
Asked, his hands trembling as he brushed her hair away from her face. Penelope nodded, but her eyes were filled with fear. She whispered,
Daddy, I didn't do anything wrong, Daddy.
her voice shaking.
I know, sweetheart. I know.
Jason whispered back, pulling her close, his voice softening as he spoke to her. As he held Penelope, his mind raced. The realization of what had been happening under his own roof hit him like a tidal wave. How had he been so blind? How had he missed the signs? The guilt gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. This wasn't the time for self-recrimination. It was time to act. Jason stood up, his decision made. He turned to Dorothy, his voice cold and devoid of the love he once felt for her.
You out of this house by tomorrow morning. And don't think I won't involve the authorities if you try anything.
Dorothy's eyes widened in shock.
Jason, you can't be serious.
I am. More serious than I've ever been in my life. You're done here, Dorothy. You're done with us.
His voice was firm, brooking no argument. For a moment, Dorothy looked like she might protest, but then she saw the resolve in Jason's eyes. She knew there was no point. The game was over, and she had lost. Without another word, she turned and left the room, the sound of her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Jason took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm raging inside him. He turned back to Penelope, who was still sitting on the floor, her eyes wide with fear and confusion.
Daddy,
She whispered, her voice small.
It's okay, Penelope.
Jason said softly, kneeling down beside her again.
She's gone. She's not going to hurt you anymore.
Penelope nodded, but the fear in her eyes didn't fully dissipate. Jason knew it would take time for her to heal from this. He had failed her by not seeing the truth sooner, but he was determined to make it right.
We're going to be okay.
Jason promised, more to himself than to Penelope.
I won't let anyone hurt you ever again.
The next morning, Dorothy was gone. She left without a word, taking only her belongings. Jason had half expected her to put up a fight, to try and convince him to give her another chance, but he was relieved when she simply left. He couldn't bear to look at her anymore, not after what she had done to his daughter. The house was quiet, almost eerily so. As Jason and Penelope tried to adjust to the new normal, Jason took some time off work, deciding that his focus needed to be on Penelope. She needed him now more than ever. He decided that they needed a fresh start, away from the memories of what had happened. Jason had a friend in Manchester who had been urging him to move there for years, offering him a position in his growing company. It was a tempting offer, but Jason had always hesitated, not wanting to uproot Penelope from her familiar surroundings. But now the decision seemed clear. They needed to leave London, to start anew in a place where they could heal and move forward. Manchester was as good a place as any. He spoke to Penelope about it that evening as they sat together on the sofa, a blanket wrapped around them both.
Penelope, how would you feel about moving to Manchester?
Jason asked gently. Penelope looked up at him, her eyes searching his face.
why, Daddy? Is it because of Auntie Dorothy?
Jason nodded slowly.
Yes, partly. But also because I think we both need a fresh start. A place where we can be happy again.
Penelope was silent for a moment, considering his words. Then she nodded.
Okay, Daddy. I think I'd like that.
Jason smiled, relieved,
We'll make it a new adventure. Just the two of us.
and so the next chapter of their lives began. Jason accepted his friend's offer, and within a few weeks, they were settled into a cozy house in a quiet neighborhood in Manchester. It was smaller than their previous home, but it was filled with warmth and love, something that had been missing for too long. Jason hired a housekeeper, a kind woman named Mrs. Maureen, who had raised 5 children of her own. and understood the importance of creating a nurturing environment. She treated Penelope with the care and respect she deserved, and slowly, Penelope began to open up again. The scars from her time with Dorothy were still there, but they were fading. Penelope started making new friends at school, and she joined a local dance class, something she had always wanted to do, but never had the chance. Jason made sure to be there for every recital, cheering her on from the front row, his heart swelling with pride. For Jason, the move was a chance to rediscover himself as well. He threw himself into his work, grateful for the distraction, but he also made sure to spend quality time with Penelope. They explored Manchester together, finding new favourite spots and making new memories. But most importantly, Jason made a vow to never let anyone come between him and his daughter again. He had been too trusting, too blind to the signs, and it had nearly cost him everything. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Life in Manchester was peaceful, almost idyllic, but the past has a way of creeping back into the present, no matter how far you run. One evening, as Jason was preparing dinner, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned. It was an unknown number, but something compelled him to answer.
Hello?
Jason, it's Dorothy.
Jason's hand tightened around the phone, his heart skipping a beat. He hadn't heard from Dorothy since the day she left. He had hoped he never would.
What do you want, Dorothy?
He asked, his voice cold.
I needed to hear your voice. I've been thinking about you, about us.
There is no us, Dorothy. Not anymore.
I know I messed up, Jason. I know I hurt you and Penelope, but I miss you. I miss what we had.
Jason closed his eyes, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over him. There had been a time when he had loved Dorothy, truly loved her, but that love had been shattered by the truth of who she was.
It's too late, Dorothy.
He said quietly.
You hurt my daughter. There's no coming back from that.
I know, and I'm sorry.
Dorothy's voice cracked, and for a moment, Jason could hear genuine regret.
I just wanted to say that.
Jason was silent, unsure of what to say. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady.
I hope you find peace, Dorothy, but we've moved on. Please, don't call us again.
He hung up the phone before she could respond, his hands shaking. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the phone, before placing it down and returning to the stove. He didn't tell Penelope about the call. She was happy now, adjusting well to their new life, and he didn't want anything to disturb that peace. But the conversation with Dorothy lingered in his mind, a reminder of how fragile happiness could be. If you enjoyed this story, please support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in our next story.